The Princess in the Tower is one of England's greatest mysteries. It's a popular topic in the history community and has garnered great attention in recent years thanks to the persistent work of Philippa Langley. But even after all the documentaries, the true crime episodes, the 10-second TikToks, all so hungrily devoured by history and mystery enthusiasts, a little fact remains unknown to many. And this little fact is, in fact, a little girl. A tragedy that is so well buried beneath the dark glamour and mystique of vanishing princes, despite the youngest of those princes being her husband. Yes, what if I told you that the youngest prince in the tower was a husband? Actually, what if I told you that at the time of his vanishing, he was a widower? And what if I told you her story?
Once upon a time in history.
Hello history nerds and welcome back to Once Upon a Time in History. We have another HERstory episode today and it is a short and tragic one. If you're not familiar with this series, HERstories tells the lives of women from history who are usually nothing more than a mentioned name, someone's wife or someone's daughter. This series aims to make them the protagonist. Out of courtesy, I'd like to issue a warning to anyone squeamish because later in this podcast, I will discuss the remains of a child. Don't forget to like and subscribe and get involved in the topic by dropping a comment. It helps the channel and every comment really excites me. Now, on with the story. The Little Heiress. The 8th Countess of Norfolk, Anne Mowbray, was born on the 10th of December 1472 at Framlingham Castle. She was the daughter of John Mowbray, the 4th Duke of Norfolk, meaning that she descended from Thomas Mowbray, the 1st Duke of Norfolk, who infamously was banished from England by Richard II. Anne's father was honoured as a Knight of the Garter by Edward IV some months before she was born. Her mother was Elizabeth Talbot, the lesser-known younger sister of Eleanor Talbot, who may have been pre-contracted to marry King Edward prior to his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. Safe to say, her family was entwined with the royal court and had been for centuries, as their name suggests. It was on the 14th of January 1476 when John Mowbray suddenly died. It is said that the Duke had been in good health on the 13th, and it's still unknown to this day what ended his life. But his end began the beginning of his daughter's, as upon his death Anne was his only child, and she inherited everything besides a castle that was torn from the family by the previous owners just after the Duke's death. As Anne was only 3 years old, we can doubt that she had a care for a castle. The death of her father not only made her a wealthy heiress, but one of the wealthiest heiresses in England. And of course, as always, it also made her a ward of the king, and I'm sure many know what kings do with wealthy, fatherless girls. Juvenile betrothal. The king had 2 sons. Edward, his precious heir who he planned a most prestigious marriage for, on the account that whoever was successfully contracted would be the future queen consort. But the second boy, then 4-year-old Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, did not have a marriage in negotiation. King Edward, much the same as his predecessors, saw an opportunity for excellent monetary gain for his backup heir. Elizabeth, Anne's mother, was in agreement for this marriage on the grounds that she received an adequate pension, which was assured by the king and granted between 1476 and 1477. And it was on the 15th of January 1478, just a month after the bride turned 5 years old, that Anne wed Richard in St. Stephen's Chapel of Westminster Abbey. The wedding was followed by 7 days of celebration, including jousts and tournaments. And with the assistance of her new sister-in-law, Elizabeth, Anne played the role of Princess of the Feast and presented jewels, likely jewellery, to the victors of tournaments and jousts. It's important to know that this was just a wedding ceremony. There was no bedding ceremony, though one was likely planned for when they were 12 to 14 years old. It isn't certain that Anne and Richard lived together, but it is known that Anne resided in the lands of her new mother-in-law, Elizabeth Woodville, where she would be educated. The most likely place she spent the remainder of her years was Greenwich Palace. We don't know anything of her life for the next 3 years and 10 months. Too soon. In 1481, Anne may have fallen into ill health. How so, we don't know for sure, but evidence that will be discussed later suggests that it wasn't assumed as life-threatening, and those who assumed would be wrong. Anne passed away around the 19th of November 1481 in Greenwich, likely at Elizabeth Woodville's palace. She was just a few months shy of her 9th birthday. A lavish funeral was held for her, and her remains were moved from Greenwich to Westminster via barge. She was buried in Westminster Abbey in the chapel of St. Erasmus. Just 21 years later, this chapel would be demolished on the orders of Henry VII as to replace it with a larger lady chapel. For 560 years, it was believed that Anne lay within the new chapel, but there was no effigy, no marker, nothing to confirm where. As the years went by, this was no longer an issue. There are many notable figures said to be buried in various places within Westminster Abbey, but the precise place becomes lost to time, and it was assumed Anne was just one of these. That was until 1964. Surprises at the bomb site. On the 11th of December 1964, a discovery confirmed that the 500-year-old assumption was incredibly wrong. Anne Mowbray's coffin had been moved entirely. While clearing the bomb site of the Church of Minoresses of St. Clair in Stepney, a burial vault was found. The workmen who discovered the vault drilled a hole as to peek inside. There they discovered the vault was empty, besides a single crudely made coffin, lying lengthways and facing a wall. This would prove to be Anne. Anne's mother had retired to the Church of Minoresses and had passed away in 1506 or 1507. It seems plausible that upon the construction of the new chapel, Elizabeth had requested for her daughter's remains to be reburied at the church with the intention of being close to her. It's also possible that the burial was meant to be temporary, with the intention of returning her remains to Westminster Abbey. Anne's identity was confirmed by an inscription on her coffin, which was a cause for excitement. It's a rare occasion when a medieval body is studied and a name and story can be firmly attributed. The original treatment of her coffin was a cause for controversy on the grounds that not enough care was taken, and this would prove to be true when the coffin was finally opened and examined. The tiny coffin. Before opening, the lead coffin already revealed much. The craftsmanship was rough with a coarse finish, leaving the impression that it had been made in great haste, likely due to Anne's death being unexpected. The coffin showed signs of recent damage from its retrieval, but also holes likely from chisels that were made centuries earlier, possibly when she was removed from Westminster. Upon opening, the skull was found to be in place, while the rest of the bones were in disarray. Anne's pelvis was found to be fractured, though note this was probably post-mortem. Her jawbone had also suffered damage at the chin. Her bones were swimming in a dark liquid that had seeped in over the centuries. Upon testing, this liquid was found to contain cholesterol. It has been considered that a hole may have been made in the coffin to originally drain it of fluid. All of Anne's bones were accounted for, including her teeth, despite many having fallen from her jaws. Her teeth are considered one of the most interesting things about her remains, with their state being enlightening to our view on oral care and issues of the time period. Anne had hypodontia, displayed as the congenital absence of her upper and lower molars on her left side. and she likely shared this condition with her great-uncle John Talbot, whose remains were identified on the battlefield of Castilian due to his missing molars. Furthermore, it has been claimed that this suggests a blood link between Anne and the two sets of remains residing in Westminster Abbey under the assumed identities of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and Anne's husband Richard of Shrewsbury. Anne's teeth were deemed to be in the appropriate stages for her age and produced no signs of ill health or chronic injury, despite having a lot of cavities. While her teeth aligned with her age of 8, nearly 9 years old, her height is a different matter. She is predicted to have been between 4'1" and 4'3", which is the average height of a 6-year-old child in the modern day. Possible causes of death. Studies of her remains gave many suggestions as to what ended her little life, but there was nothing conclusive. Samples of her bones revealed relatively short-lived radioactivity caused by the thorium series, but the level of leads in her body could be caused by the lead coffin itself or by medication taken during her lifetime. Thorium is related to cancers such as lung and bone, but her bones don't show any clear evidence of cancer and her lungs are not present. Another suggestion of cancer as a cause of death is her zinc levels, which would suggest leukemia, but it must be noted that these results were not conclusive. This is due to the possibility that the zinc could have been exchanged with the calcium found in the coffin water. Levels of arsenic were also found in Anne's hair, but this isn't taken as a suggestion of poisoning. Instead, it's unalarming, as this could have easily entered her system via medication. But it is her thick mat of reddish-brown hair that reveals to us the most about her demise. Its brittle state and vitamin levels suggest that she was in ill health for some months, but it doesn't reveal precisely why. It is likely, though, that her body would have been vulnerable to various diseases in this state, evidence of which is now lost as her organs were not preserved. It seems that the death of little Anne Mowbray might be just another mystery to coincide with the vanishing of the princes in the Tower. Thanks so much for watching. If you love hearing stories of women from history that you may not be familiar with, you should subscribe now for more HERstories. Help me reach 1,000 followers. It's a tiny goal, but I'll be forever grateful. And if you're interested in sources and want to fall down the rabbit hole on Anne Mowbray, check the description. Don't forget to check me out on TikTok. I'm Once Upon a Time in History. See you next time in another time in history.